10 men stand before the most powerful person in Egypt. They don't recognize him. How could they? 22 years have passed. The 17-year-old boy they threw into a pit became this, a man in Egyptian robes, speaking Egyptian, commanding Egyptian power. He wears makeup, gold, authority. Everything about him screams Egypt. But he knows them, every face, every voice, every gesture. Joseph's heart pounds. His brothers bow low, just as his teenage dreams predicted. The dreams they hated, the dreams they tried to kill. Now those dreams stand fulfilled before him, and they have no idea. He could reveal himself, could weep, could embrace them, but not yet. First, they must be tested. First, Joseph must know, have they changed, or are they still the men who sold their brother for 20 pieces of silver? Benjamin isn't with them, the youngest brother, Rachel's other son, the only full brother Joseph has. Where is your youngest brother? He demands through an interpreter. They don't know he understands Hebrew, don't know tears stream down his face in private, don't know the Egyptian governor interrogating them is the boy whose blood they showed their father. This is the climax, but it's not where the story begins. Act 1. The Favorite Son. When love creates hatred. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, but the first son of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife. Born in Haran after years of Rachel's barrenness, Joseph was the answer to desperate prayers. His name means, "He shall add," Rachel's hope that God would add another son. Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons, not subtly, not discreetly, openly, flagrantly. Genesis records, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors." That coat, richly ornamented, a tunic reaching to his wrists and ankles, the kind worn by royalty, not workers. Every brother saw it and knew, Father loves him most. The favoritism that destroyed Jacob's childhood was now poisoning his children's. Joseph was 17 years old when everything changed. He brought bad reports about his brothers to his father. Then came the dreams. In the first dream, they were binding sheaves in the field. Joseph's sheaf stood upright, while his brother's sheaves bowed down to it. In the second, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed to Joseph. Joseph told his brothers, then told his father. Even Jacob rebuked him. "What is this dream? Shall I and your mother and your brothers bow down to you?" The brothers were frozen by envy. Joseph's arrogant boasting of his dreams to his brothers almost cost him his life, but teenage Joseph didn't read the room, didn't sense danger, didn't know his coat and his dreams were signing his death warrant. Act 2. The Pit and the Deception. When brothers become murderers. Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers in Shechem. They saw him from afar, and before he came near, they conspired to kill him. "Here comes this dreamer," they said. "Let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits." Reuben, the oldest, intervened. "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and restore him to his father. They stripped Joseph of his coat, that hated coat, and threw him into an empty cistern. No water, just stone walls and terror. Then they sat down to eat, Joseph's screams echoing from the pit. A caravan of Ishmaelites approached, carrying spices to Egypt. Judah saw opportunity. "What profit is there in killing our brother? Let's sell him to these traders."
They sold Joseph for 20 shekels of silver, the price of a slave. When Reuben returned to the pit, it was empty. He tore his clothes in anguish. The brothers slaughtered a goat, dipped Joseph's coat in blood, and brought it to his father. "We found this. Do you recognize it?" Jacob identified it immediately. "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. He refused to be comforted, saying, "I will go down to the grave mourning for my son." Meanwhile, Joseph arrived in Egypt and was sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Act 3. From slave to prisoner, when integrity costs everything. Potiphar was captain of Pharaoh's guard, likely in charge of the prison for royal officials. Joseph quickly found favor in his master's eyes and was appointed head of Potiphar's estate. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had. Joseph was well-built and handsome. Potiphar's wife noticed. Day after day she tried to seduce him. "Lie with me," she demanded. Joseph had good reasons not to have an affair. He did not want to abuse his master's trust. He believed in the sanctity of marriage, and it went against his ethical, moral, and religious principles. He refused repeatedly. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" One day she caught him by his garment. "Lie with me." He fled, leaving his garment in her hand. Twice now a garment has been used against Joseph. First, his brothers used his coat to fake his death. Now Potiphar's wife uses his cloak to fake his guilt. She screamed for the household. "This Hebrew slave came to me to mock me. When I screamed, he left his garment and fled." Eventually, Potiphar's wife tricked him and accused him. Potiphar was angry and had Joseph put in prison. According to the Midrash, Joseph would have been immediately executed by the sexual assault charge. Execution would have been the normal punishment for the sin he was falsely accused of committing. But Potiphar only imprisoned him. Perhaps he suspected the truth. Joseph was about 17 years old when he was sold into slavery. He was 30 years old when he was released from prison. So he had been enslaved and imprisoned for close to 13 years. 13 years for doing the right thing. Act 4. The Forgotten Interpreter. When God's timing seems cruel. The spiritual greatness of Joseph is remarkable. How many people become bitter over some real or imagined slight? Joseph was falsely accused and thrown into prison. How easy it would have been to give up, to say, "What's the use of trying to serve God?" But there was not a trace of bitterness, no blaming the Lord. Joseph's charisma followed him to prison, and the warden soon appointed him as his right-hand man. The Lord still helped Joseph. The guard began to trust him, so he put Joseph in charge of the other prisoners. In time, Pharaoh's royal cupbearer and baker were imprisoned. Both had dreams on the same night. Joseph saw them looking troubled and asked why. They told him they needed someone to interpret their dreams. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams," Joseph said. Unselfishly, he offered to interpret, telling them the knowledge came from God. The cupbearer's dream meant restoration in 3 days. The baker's dream meant execution in 3 days. Joseph urged the cupbearer, "When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." 3 days later, Both interpretations came true. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was hanged. But the cupbearer forgot Joseph. Joseph languished in Pharaoh's dungeon for more than 2 years after this. 2 more years of waiting. 2 more years of wondering if God had abandoned him. Then Pharaoh had 2 dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 gaunt cows. 7 healthy grain heads swallowed by 7 thin ones. When he awoke, Pharaoh could not find anyone to interpret his dreams. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembered how Joseph had helped him. Pharaoh sent for Joseph. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, 13 years after being sold into slavery. Act 5. From prisoner to prince. When dreams meet reality. "I have heard it said that you can interpret dreams," Pharaoh said. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Even after 13 years of slavery and prison, Joseph remained faithful to God, giving him all credit. Joseph interpreted 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. The dreams came twice because God would surely bring this to pass. Joseph advised storing grain during the good years to survive the bad years. Pharaoh was impressed. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second in command, placing him in charge of all Egypt to prepare for the famine. In one day, Joseph went from prisoner to prince, from forgotten to famous, from chains to second most powerful man in Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. Joseph and Asenath had 2 sons during the 7 years of plenty. He named the firstborn Manasseh. God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Notice the names. Manasseh, forget. Joseph tried to forget the pain. Ephraim, fruitful. Joseph found purpose in suffering. But he couldn't fully forget. Deep down, he still wondered about his father, his brothers, Benjamin. 7 years of abundance came. Egypt stored grain. Then the famine began. People traveled to Egypt to buy the food Joseph had stored, including 10 brothers from Canaan. Act 6. The test. When the past bows before you. Meanwhile, the effects of the famine were felt in Canaan. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Joseph's brothers journeyed there to buy food, not realizing the Egyptian governor was their brother. Joseph decided to utilize this opportunity to observe whether his brothers truly regretted selling him. He wanted to see if they had changed. Would they abandon Benjamin like they abandoned him? When they bowed before him, Joseph recognized them immediately. The motif of dreams contribute to the narrative. Joseph was shown as a dreamer. This led to trouble. Now those dreams were fulfilled as his brothers bowed before him. He accused them of spies. They protested, "We are 12 brothers, sons of one man. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." One is no more. They still wouldn't admit they sold him, still lying after 22 years. Joseph imprisoned them for 3 days, then released all but Simeon. "Bring your youngest brother to prove you're not spies." He secretly returned their money in their grain sacks. When they discovered the money, they were terrified. "What is this that God has done to us?" At home, Jacob refused to send Benjamin. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." But famine persisted. Eventually, Judah pledged his own life for Benjamin's safety. Jacob relented.
Act 7. The Silver Cup. When the final test comes. The brothers returned with Benjamin. Joseph prepared a feast. He seated them in birth order. How would an Egyptian know their birth order? He gave Benjamin 5 times as much food. He wept when he saw his younger brother, but hid it. When they left, Joseph had his steward plant his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Later, the steward overtook them and discovered the cup. Benjamin would become a slave for the theft. The other brothers could go free. Judah stepped forward, ready to die in Benjamin's place. "Let me remain as your slave instead of the boy. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me?" They were united, ready to sacrifice for one another. They no longer bore jealousy toward their half-brother. They had changed. Act 8. The Revelation. When tears break the silence. Joseph could stand it no longer. "Out, all of you," he commanded his attendants. When they were alone, Joseph wept so loudly that the Egyptians in the house heard it. "I am Joseph," he said in Hebrew. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were speechless, stunned, terrified. "Please come closer," he said. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." Joseph recognized that all the travails he had undergone were ordained by God to ensure the survival of Egypt and the surrounding countries. The pit, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison, the forgotten years, all of it was God positioning Joseph to save his family. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph fell on Benjamin's neck and wept. Benjamin wept on his neck. Then Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. 22 years of silence shattered by tears. Act 9. The Father's Joy. When the dead return to life. The brothers returned to Canaan and told Jacob, "Joseph is still alive, and he is governor of all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart grew numb. He could not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said, and when they saw the wagons Joseph had sent, Jacob's spirit revived. "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." At Beersheba, God spoke to Jacob in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob." "Here I am," he answered. "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph will close your eyes." When Jacob reached Egypt, Joseph prepared his chariot and went to meet him. Joseph presented himself and fell on his father's neck and wept on his neck a good while. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Jacob and his family settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. Pharaoh welcomed Joseph's family and gave them the best of the land. Act 10. The Blessing and the Death. When the dreamer rests. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years until his death at age 147. Before dying, he blessed his sons. He gave Joseph a special gift. His 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, would be counted as separate tribes among Israel.
When Jacob died, Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. After their father died, Joseph's brothers feared retribution. Joseph wept as they spoke and told them, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good, to save many lives. Don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." He comforted them. Joseph ruled Egypt for 80 years until his death at age 110. Before his passing, he made his brothers promise to take his coffin with them when they eventually left Egypt for the Promised Land. "God will surely come to your aid," Joseph said, "and when he does, you must carry my bones from this place." Joseph died and was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. The children of Israel remembered their oath. When they left during the Exodus, Moses took Joseph's bones with him. The bones were eventually buried at Shechem. Epilogue: The Dreamer's Legacy. Remember the opening. Joseph standing before his brothers in the Egyptian throne room. They bowed, not knowing they were fulfilling a teenager's dreams from 22 years earlier. Dreams that almost got him killed. Dreams that seemed absurd when he lay in a pit. Dreams that appeared dead when he sat in prison. Dreams that finally, impossibly, came true. Joseph was revered as someone whose suffering and elevation served a divine purpose to save his family during a famine. Joseph's journey from betrayal to forgiveness reflects a profound understanding of divine purpose and human relationships. Joseph's story teaches us that God works through suffering, not despite it. The pit was part of the plan. The prison was preparation. The false accusations positioned Joseph for palace life. Everything, absolutely everything, was orchestrated to put Joseph exactly where he needed to be to save his family. The passage reveals how Joseph forgives his brothers and acknowledges God's plan and providence for his life. Not only do we learn about trust and loyalty from Joseph's example, but we also see the power of forgiveness. The fact that Joseph could see beyond his brother's actions and look to what God was doing through his suffering is a testament to his unwavering faith. 13 years of slavery and imprisonment. 13 years of wondering if God had forgotten him. 13 years that positioned him to save millions from starvation, including the very brothers who sold him. Joseph's great-grandson would be Joshua, who led Israel into the Promised Land. Joseph's distant descendant would be Jesus, who, like Joseph, was rejected by his brothers, sold for silver, falsely accused, descended into the place of the dead, and rose to save his people from destruction. Joseph's story highlights the proper attitude toward difficulty and misfortune. He recognized that all his travails were ordained by God to ensure survival. When his brothers feared revenge, Joseph said, "You did not send me here, but God." That perspective changes everything. Joseph didn't view himself as a victim. He saw himself as positioned, not abandoned by God, but placed by God. The coat of many colors was torn from him, but Egypt's royal robes clothed him instead. The pit he was thrown into became the prison he was released from into power. The dreams his brothers tried to kill became the very means of their salvation. Stand in Egypt today, in the Delta region called Goshen. This is where Joseph settled his family. This is where they multiplied from 70 people to over 2 million. This is where they later became slaves, setting the stage for Moses and the Exodus. Everything, absolutely everything, traces back to the 17-year-old dreamer his brothers threw into a pit. The boy who annoyed his brothers with his dreams became the man who saved them with his position. The teenager sold for 20 pieces of silver became the prince who freely gave grain to save lives. The rejected son became the redeemer of his family. Joseph never stopped dreaming, even in the pit, even in the prison, even in the years of waiting. He held on to what God showed him, no matter how impossible it seemed. And in the end, his dreams, those hated, mocked, seemingly impossible dreams, saved the world. That's the power of a dreamer who trusts God timing. That's the triumph of faith that survives betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and forgotten years in prison. That's the legacy of a man who said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." The dreams came true, all of them, not when Joseph expected, not how Joseph expected, but better than Joseph could have imagined. Because sometimes the pit is the path to the palace. Sometimes the prison is preparation for power. Sometimes being forgotten by men means being positioned by God.